And welcome to the Outsiders. I am Josh Gross, joined as always by Jeff Sherwood. Hope you guys are doing well. Thank you for following us on YouTube. This is live on Periscope, of course. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do that. Hit the subscribe button. Jeff Sherwood would appreciate it quite a bit. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Good.
What's going on in your world?
Well, I had some chili that I loved for dinner, but it didn't love me back. That's why I'm starting a little bit late.
Don't make me post the photo you texted me, because I was going to surprise you with this. Like I can't do that. But you bring it up first thing. I was like, why would you send me that photo, Jeff? It's best to be described, I think, as opposed
proof.
To I don't doubt you. I don't need your proof. What do you like?
Well, yeah.
I'm not asking for verification on that. I trust you when you say you had chili, and then you don't need to say anything more.
That's a very nice color blue that my underwear are, right?
Yeah, no, I just didn't need to see it, and I'm not interested. And I will spare the people who are listening and watching today. So thank you, Jeff, for clearing out your system. We are good to go to talk about mixed martial arts. There were, of course, fights on the weekend. The UFC was back in Las Vegas at the Apex Center. Derek Brunson against Edmen Shahbazyan in the main event, and it did not go the way that I think a lot of people might have expected it. I think Derek Brunson's a guy that's easy to overlook. And, of course, Shahbazyan, with all the hype, the results that he had, of course, the connection to Ronda Rousey, and it seemed like the UFC giving him the full court press. A lot of people were expecting him to walk out undefeated, the golden boy, all of that, Glendale's own. Didn't happen. Derek Brunson, too much? Was this too early for Edmen? What did you take away from this fight, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of hype going, but I think a lot of people still failed to remember how good Derek Brunson can be. He doesn't always look that good, but there's moments that Derek Brunson has that he's a very good fighter. He's been doing it for a long time. He's a smart guy inside the octagon. And it was just a little too much. Sometimes you try and push people, you think they're ready. They look like they're ready. But really, when you break down their record, they haven't really fought anybody like a Derek Brunson. And I think this was a prime example of that.
Yeah, now 21-7 for Brunson. On a good stretch here. I mean, that win against Ian Heinzich at UFC 241. He's got a win against Elias Theodoro. I think Theodoro is one of these guys who's not very dangerous, but he can grind you to a win. That didn't work out for him against Brunson. Heinzich, a little bit more pop, a little bit more dangerous. I was actually at that fight. Brunson, I think, outworked him and fought a better game plan and won a deserved decision. And here with Shahbazyan, I think you definitely saw an experience gap that was the big thing for him to exploit. Edmen, I think there's learning opportunities for him in this fight, but what did you make of the stoppage or non-stoppage at the second round? I know a lot of people were getting squeamish. A lot of people are getting squeamish about these stoppages. Stop it now. Don't let him take the damage. Did you see that with Edmen? Was there any lessons for him to be learned because he made it into that third round?
I don't think so. Lessons to be learned, of course. I mean, anytime you're in the octagon for 3 rounds with a fighter that's been doing it for a long time, you come away learning. Yeah. And a lot of times you learn a lot more from your losses than you do your wins. So I'm sure he's going to be able to take some, things away from this fight, this loss, and figure it out. And I still think he's going to be a very good fighter.
Yeah. So I get, of course, very young, 21 or 22, still the talent's there, but you lose that 0 in the loss column and you do it the way that he lost it. He seemed to be a guy that was sort of all in on that belief that you kind of get out of some of these Glendale fighters, right? Maybe the skills aren't there entirely, but there's that belief. And then once you lose that, that's the question that happened with Rousey. Mm-hmm. Will it happen with Edmen here? Can he sort of move on from this? I know there's lessons to be learned, but he also took a lot of damage, and he's not going to be the confident fighter. There's no way he can be after that. But it feels like this is kind of his life. He grew up in this world. He's cornering Ronda Rousey. It's 16, inter camps, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Very interesting project with him because he was getting the full court press. There's no doubt about it. The UFC was all about him, was pushing him hard, and that didn't quite work out. And we'll see how it goes with prospects. The rest of this card, Jeff, there was some good, some bad. Jennifer Maia, beautiful armbar against Joanne Calderwood. This was a decision by Calderwood to take this fight. It seemed she had a title fight next. It was sort of right there for her, but to take this short notice fight, part of the equation that fighters are now dealing with when they have to face the phone call, right? You get the phone call from your manager, hey, the UFC wants you in this fight. They're asking for you on this short notice fight. Do you take it? She said yes. Clear mistake, right? This was a mistake.
Well, now it is. But
even
I mean,
even before in the calculations, like it felt like an unnecessary risk.
It's probably a mistake to say no to the UFC these days. That's my guess. And I don't know for a fact, but I mean, I think if you're a fighter and the UFC calls and says, hey, we need you, I think it's in your best interest to go ahead and say, I'll take it.
Yeah. We'll hit on that here because this card had a lot of upheaval, especially in the last day or so. We can run through it. The cancellations. Ray Borg was supposed to be on this card. He's got a history, of course, of falling out. Didn't work out for him. Eric Spicely was supposed to be on this card. He had a weight issue. The guy he was fighting, Marcus Perez, got another opponent who then couldn't fight because he was deemed ineligible by Nevada, I think it was. There was other contests that were moved around. So a lot on here. And it brought up the question of like, what do fight promoters owe fighters? The bout agreements for making a certain weight and then showing up on fight day. If you're making weight but not showing up on fight day and it's not your fault, should you be compensated? It seems like most fighters now expect to be or are complaining if they're not, but it's so haphazard. It's so arbitrary. What are you getting paid? And who determines that? I mean, right now, all the UFC all day long, if they kind of like you, right?
Right. And didn't Dana, I saw a little quote thing that said, Dana said they were getting paid, but not their show money. So that means they're getting paid less. I mean, they had a training camp. They showed up. They were on weight, ready to fight. I think it should be in the contract. And if I was a manager, and I don't even know if this is feasible or not, but if I was a manager, and that would be one of my things, I would have it in the contract to say if that was ever a case and my fighter shows up and is on weight and something happens to his opponent last minute, we at least get show money. And I think that should be a no-brainer in my eyes.
It's hard to disagree with that. Some guys and ladies get a lot more show money than others. And, that was the case here that we saw with Marcus Perez. And we saw, Ed Herman couldn't compete because the guy he was fighting got COVID and Herman wanted like all of his money and he couldn't quite get it. Good luck being a manager and negotiating these things into contracts. I mean, where's the leverage to do so? I think it's a good request. Should it be a percentage of the purse you're guaranteed or the entire show money? I mean,
it should be the entire show money. That's what you're doing. You're showing, right? You show up and you're ready to go. Even
if you make weight, doesn't guarantee you'll show up. We saw that with Ken Shamrock against Kimbo, right? So sometimes it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah,
what owed? Like, what is their responsibility?
I think show money.
So just making weight, just showing up the morning before the fight or the day before the fight.
Well,
making weight.
If something happens, so
right,
fighter A shows up, makes weight, he's ready to go. Right, all of a sudden between that time that he got on the scale and the time that they are to walk in the octagon, something happens, and that fight doesn't take place. He should get his show money. He or she. No matter what. And it doesn't matter how much they're getting paid or whatever. Yeah. That's part of the contract because, when the UFC doesn't want to pay you more or something, they point to the contract, right? So it would go both ways. It doesn't matter if there's a fighter, the only tricky point would be like if some of these fighters, they make they make a salary or whatever. It's no win bonus. It's just a fight.
One fee for the fight. Yeah.
Right. And that might be a little tricky, but I'm pretty sure if you're a good fighter, a popular fighter and the manager comes in with something like that, he can probably get it in. If you're somebody on the undercard, buried in the undercard, you come in with a request like that, they're going to laugh you out of the office. But
yeah, it'd be nice to see something. It'd be nice to see something universal across the board. You know,
it should be show money. I've said it forever.
Full show money, yeah, it's great. But if you're a promoter and you're stuck, I mean, I know these promoters now. Bellator is now paying out money. Some fights on the card we're going to talk about coming up this weekend with Benson Henderson and Mike Chandler were canceled. Bellator kicked some of those fighters some money. PFL, obviously, their entire season was paid the kickback, which they did until the spring. They're paying some fighters a monthly stipend. But at the same time, it's a business, right? It's like I think the fighters should consider negotiating a portion of what their show money should be, the very minimum, because right now it's completely arbitrary up to the UFC, whether they like you, whether they like your manager,
right,
whatever the case is. It seems like one of those things that should be written in, and I think you have a point on there. It's not going to affect all fighters the same way, but all fighters can get knocked off the card. So, you know, if you're a bigger fighter and you carried the press and you have a higher show money, you should get a piece of that compared to a guy or a girl who's making 10 for show. You know, should get you all 10. It's a hard one.
You should get it all. You should get it all. I guarantee you, if there was a union,
right, that
would be automatic. Yeah. They would get. I mean, the union would make that a rule. Like, and it would be unified, right? I mean, everyone that's in the UFC, if there's a union, our Bellator, I'm sure there would be somewhere in the rules that would say if this happens that the fighters would get their show money. I guarantee it. Yeah.
You know, of course, the way that these associations work, a lot of things are laid out, right? Including drug testing policy. The UFC fighters really have no voice in what their drug testing policy is as far as USADA goes, but they're no different than any other fighter if they're competing in a state. So we're now dealing with a situation in Nevada where several fighters, 3, I think, or 2, had positive marijuana tests. Of course, USADA is kind of like push the marijuana thing to the side. It's not a factor, especially out of competition. They're said, we don't care about this. And that way they're like kind of like the NBA. Although I think the NBA, even in competition, they don't care. And that seems to be like the right place to be. Yeah. Unless you can confirm that a fighter steps into the ring or the cage and they're high, like what's the difference? Why is this something that's policed other than it was part of a larger drug testing idea that now kind of feels antiquated? I think we deal with marijuana in a way that it's probably not the best for society, and that's a conversation that's happening right now, right? Prison reform, legalization, all these things, and fighters don't live in a vacuum. They still live under all this that we live under, the same tent. They're still people. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you can go to a pot store here where I live in West Hollywood and buy it totally legally, smoke it in the comfort of your house, and you have no repercussion for it on the job, why should a fighter be any different? I think Nevada's got to revise some things here, right? Why are we even talking about this?
Yeah, well, I mean, me personally, I agree with you. The marijuana should go away, but to argue the other side is I'm a state employee, and even though marijuana is legal and I could go down the street here and buy it legally, but if I was to ever test positive for it at work, it's not okay. I'm fired. So are automatically enrolled in a drug program or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I mean, I could see both sides, but I mean, I've been around a lot of these guys. They train hard. If it helps them sleep, helps them relax, you know, I have no problems with it.
They're not dealing with like dangerous machinery. They're not driving on the roads.
Right. They probably are.
No, well, but I mean, it's not part of the job description, right?
Right.
So, what's the point? And I think sometimes we get lost with what is the point versus just sort of these blanket actions. And
well, what other recreational drugs do they test for?
Well, you can't be drunk, right? So right. You can't step into a cage and you can't be drunk.
So what about out of competition?
Depending on who you are in the recreation, I mean, they test for cocaine and stuff like that. So, but that's obviously illegal. So,
right.
But none of us can show up to our work drunk, just like none of us can show up to our work high. But that's not what we're talking about. We can go home after work and have a few drinks. We can go home afterwards and, hit a joint, whatever it is. I think state jobs, these kinds of things, they come with concessions, and that's just the reality of it. But we're not talking about that. The Nevada is the state, and it's their rules, but they're not. These fighters aren't state employees,
right?
So it's a lot of shades of gray. And I think it's
UFC employees.
What's that?
They're not even UFC employees.
They're not. They're independent contractors. They're not employed by anybody.
Yeah.
And so it's a conversation to be had. It just feels like, why do these fighters not have to deal with this? Why do they have to burden themselves with the conversation around their marijuana usage? It didn't affect a fight.
Right.
It didn't affect the fight.
Yeah.
And obviously we remember all remember Nick Diaz and Takanori Gomi and all these sorts of things. So it just feels kind of like a relic of a discussion. And if USADA, which is testing these fighters left and right, 24/7, 365, is not going to take an issue with marijuana, unless it's in competition. That's a different thing. And that's like a small window. If you test outside that window, and I believe that's what happened with these fighters, it's kind of like nobody's business.
Right.
I feel like.
I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. It's ridiculous at this point. At this time, the way that the times are right now, if you want to go, get home and smoke a bowl or whatever you do, it's like, go ahead and do it. I mean, how many, there's so many people out there that you would probably never expect that go home and do it in the comfort of their own home these days. So,
and it shouldn't matter. I mean, it's, how many people have been smoking pot forever. So it doesn't,
right.
it doesn't really, it's not a thing. It's part of an accepted piece of our culture now.
Right.
It's becoming legally accepted across the country. To hammer these fighters, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's 1,000 times better than them taking painkillers. It's 1,000 times better than them popping pills. I mean,
absolutely.
It just is. So, the health and safety thing, it kind of gets a little screwy when you start thinking about it in those terms. But that's the reality of competing in the modern day. And there's changes. There's constant changes. So hopefully this is something that changes again, because I think the conversation needs to be geared in that direction, not punitive, not holding these fighters accountable necessarily, but saying, hey, should we be doing this? What's the price? Why are we doing this? That's something I think Nevada really has to answer to and look on. Of course, Jeff, the fights continue, whether these guys are smoking pot or not. And we have fights on Friday with Bellator, Saturday with the UFC, both solid cards. I think you can make a case that the Bellator card's actually a little flashier. The main event might be a little bit more attractive for people. Which main event do you prefer, the Benson Henderson Michael Chandler fight or Derek Lewis against Alexei Oleinik? Which one do you think, just on its own, if you can only watch one of the two, would you take in, regardless of promotion, whatever channel it is, who cares? Snap fingers, Jeff Sherwood sitting ringside for one of those two fights. Which is it?
I would probably pick Chandler Henderson. The only reason why I even debate a little bit is because it's a rematch. But other than that, I think it's going to be way more of a, better fight, competitive fight. I want to say that Derek Lewis doesn't matter because he does, and Alexei even at this point does. But in the big scheme of the MMA world, at the end of the Chandler Henderson fight, it probably means a little more than the Derek Lewis Alexei fight in my eyes.
Let's talk about that. We'll talk about the UFC card in a second, but you make a fair point, and not just because the fight itself. I think Michael Chandler is still an elite lightweight. We don't know how elite, quite honestly. He's in his own little kind of Bellator universe. They have really good lightweights. He's one of them. Benson Henderson, we've seen the best of Benson. I think he's still a very competent, quality lightweight. He could beat a lot of lightweights out there, but not the top of the game anymore. But This is really about, I think, Michael Chandler, this fight, because this is the last bout on his Bellator agreement. What is he going to do? Where is he going to go? What's the best place for Michael Chandler? First things first, we're presuming he wins. Because if he loses this fight, I think that completely knocks off so much of the interest and the attraction a UFC would have. Maybe a PFL would still be interested if he takes a loss. Maybe one is still interested if he takes a loss. Bellator probably the most interested, even if Chandler takes a loss, because he's such a known commodity in that organization, such a factor over the years. If you're the main promoter, Jeff Sherwood runs mixed martial arts. What promotion does Michael Chandler end up, and why does he go there?
If he wins,
yes,
he ends up in the UFC. I like you said, if he loses, I doubt the UFC will even bother. Even though I agree with everything you said, he's a great fighter, quality fighter. I would love to see. There's a lot, a lot of. Like you said, the weight class in Bellator is very good as well. But that weight class in the UFC is phenomenal, and I would like to see Chandler in the mix.
By the way, it's good in one as well. I mean,
yes.
I think the fight that a lot of people would want to see that can get made if Michael Chandler becomes a free agent is a rematch with Eddie Alvarez. And that exists in one, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's lots of options, and this is one of those weight classes that has always been fractured, always strong globally. I think the UFC jettisoning the division in 2005 after that Eve Edwards win over Josh Thompson really leveled the playing field. The UFC's division is incredible. Bellator's is very, very good. One, also quality. And PFL, I mean, I think name recognition-wise, probably not the strongest. But if you're Michael Chandler and you know that maybe it's not the strongest weight class and you can be featured and win a weight class and win $1 million, and they're kicking pretty good money, I think, to some fighters who are coming over. How attractive is PFL as an option now? You wouldn't fight to the spring. It's more self-contained. You're familiar with the tournament format. You've won in that tournament format. Let's rank the best possibilities, okay? I think UFC, just in terms of having never been there, the potential money, and then the immediate fame and recognition that can come with winning the big fights. If you're a competitor, and Chandler's always been that guy who's talked about himself as a competitor, that's option number one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Chandler is that type of guy.
Yeah.
He wants to test himself against who he feels is the best in the world.
So option number, go ahead.
He definitely gets that in the UFC.
He does. He also has the highest risks. He can go to UFC and get blown out.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what are you talking about? Maybe he made a good payday on his first one. His contract doesn't roll over. It's not making a big payday. He's never going to get that piece of the pay-per-view. They're probably not going to do a lot to push him. He's been Mr. Bellator. Why would the UFC get behind him at that point? So there's risk there. If you go and re-sign with Bellator, very familiar, some big money fights, some fights for you there. You're going to be a guy who gets a big push. You're familiar with that. You make money with Monster and a couple other ways. It almost feels like if he stays with Bellator, he's saying, I'm comfortable with my career.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I know. This is what I'm going to do. Better overall situation if he ends up there, or do you hold it against him a little bit, just as an outside observer?
Well, we always would. We've always had, how many conversations have we had about fighters? Well, if they were only in the UFC, we would know a little bit more. And I think as a competitive fighter, that would probably be in the back of their mind as well. They know that people say that. I mean, they read forums, they read Twitter, they read websites. And I think if you're a true competitor, which I think Chandler is, that would always be in the back of his head. So, I'm still at the point and not ready to let it go to say every mixed martial arts fighter wants to fight in the UFC. And I still believe that.
Mm-hmm.
It might change someday, but it's been that way for a long time, and I feel it's still that way.
Yeah, vast majority, that's where they want to be. That's where they see it. Some don't. I mean, I've talked to fighters who say, I'm comfortable not being in the UFC, especially some of the younger fighters inside Bellator.
I don't believe them.
I do. I believe some of them. I think that they feel like they have a strong home there that's paying them very well, and they have really high quality competition. The younger ones who are coming up through the system feel that way. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, you're right. I think on total, the way that people look at this sport, the way people look at the UFC compared to every other promotion, that's where you kind of have to be validated. And whether that's true or not, that's what people believe. Mm-hmm. And that's something. That's not a thing you can just dismiss outright. For Chandler, there's the attraction there. Bellator also has attractions. One is, I think PFL, you get why they would want him. Would he want that? Maybe. One, that Eddie Alvarez thing, I think, is a real kind of, it may stick in his craw a little bit, right?
It might. Being a competitor. But
and I think those two guys are smart. They know one another. That's a fight that could sell. I just don't know where one is at this point.
Right.
And whether they can pull it off. And that's a fight really for North American audiences. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense for them? So I don't know. He's got to win. He's got to beat Benson Henderson. And are you taking him to do that? Or do you think Henderson sort of makes this conversation pointless?
I don't think so. I think he gets the job done.
Yeah.
You broke down Benson Henderson earlier in the show, and I totally agreed with everything you said.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I just want to know if he still fights with the toothpick in his mouth.
Yeah, if he does, he's not telling anybody. I think he's kind of quit that one. Some changes to this card, as I alluded to. Those fighters were compensated according to Bellator and other reports. Christian Edwards was one of those fighters, a very young prospect who I'm super high on, so a little disappointing to not see him get a chance to compete. But otherwise, Matt Mitrione returns against Timothy Johnson, so heavyweight love if you're into that sort of thing. Curtis Millender against Sabah Humasi. Got to say, for Humasi, he is Lebanese. And, Jeff, I'm sure you saw the news out of Beirut, that incredible explosion. Did you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, terrible, and hopefully, I think he said that his aunt lives close enough that her home was damaged, or where she lives was damaged. So, very, very shocking thing to see, and disturbing and unfortunate and sad, obviously. Yeah. Curtis Millender, who he's taking on, is a guy who came over from UFC. I still think there's a lot of talent there. There's going to be people who don't give him his due if he goes over to Bellator and starts having success, but he's talented. So he's a fighter to watch. And then the rest of the televised card, good lightweight fight. Miles Jury, decent lightweight, taking on Georgi Karakanian.
I like that fight.
It's a good fight, quality fight. Not sure how much to really pay attention to feel like I need to be absorbed by that fight, but it's a good quality fight. Some names on the undercard as well to pay attention to. So that's Bellator back in Mohegan Sun. Of course, they're joining the Showtime cards on boxing. Boxing was there last weekend. Then we get into the UFC. UFC's back at Apex. We will see the main event between Derek Lewis and Alexei Oleinik. This is did you see this video that Derek Lewis put on social media?
No.
Apparently he got Alexei's meals, and literally on his social media, you see him lifting off the cover, spitting in it, and putting it back on, like he's going to give it back to Alexei in some way. I think spitting is repulsive, and it's like the worst.
These days, you could go to jail for stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's fighting and fight promotion and whatever, and I'm not going to hold it against him because he's there. My balls is Hot Lewis, right. And whatever, that's that guy. But
we've been through the sushi era, so we remember that. So it's not quite as bad, but still, That's bad.
So that's something he put out on social media. I don't know how real that is. Alexei's not out here talking trash. Derek picks up kind of like that idea, right? He's the guy that's going to run with all that. But as the fight goes, you're talking about Alexei Oleinik, who musters the most submission attempts per round in the UFC against the guy who faces the most submission attempts per round in the UFC. I mean, what gives you the hope that Derek Lewis knows how to defend anything that Alexi's going to send his way? Very little.
Very little.
Very little.
If he does, it'll be great. Because
Right.
if he adds that to his game someday, which at this point I'm not real hopeful of, but you know, I would be more interested in him as a fighter and what he does if he showed me a little bit of that. And he just hasn't really showed me that much of that. And I'm always worried about his back. Like, we never know as he comes into a fight, is his back messed up? And, because when once you hurt your back, I mean, you just tweak it, you just sleep on it wrong.
It's hard to say.
At night.
It's hard to say. He can talk about being in shape and it's just hard. You don't know what you're getting. And that's not just him. That's any fighter at this point.
Yeah.
So if he's not right, if he can't defend a takedown, if he locks up with Alexi and really has difficulty, he's going to get submitted. I don't think there's any question about that. He's just not skilled enough.
Right.
Just not skilled enough. Big physical guy. It's not out of the realm of possibility like any Derek Lewis fight, but it's kind of hard to picture him winning that contest. Jeff, what else is there on this card? Chris Weidman desperately needs a win. Taking on Omari Akhmedov. What do we think about Weidman at this point?
Yeah, I mean, if you pull his record up on SureDog, there's a lot more red than green.
Right.
But all those guys are monsters.
Yeah.
With the red. And then right in the middle is win against Gastelum. But I don't know. I just feel, hopefully I'm wrong. But I just feel like we've already seen the best of him that we're going to see. And from here on out, it's going to kind of taper off. He's still going to be competitive in most all of his fights, and he's still going to win some. But do I see him ever making a run at the title? I don't see it anymore at this point.
Yeah, the 5 of the 6 losses are stoppage losses. I don't. Yeah, I agree with you that he seems so far gone from his contender days. And here he is facing a guy who's actually on a win streak, all decisions. It doesn't seem like Akhmedov's got a ton of pop. So, if he doesn't win this fight, he's got what are we doing here? What are we really doing here with Chris Weidman?
Well, I don't know what his contract status is, but
I mean, if he's got his contract, he'll fight it out if they want to keep him. But like you said, it's like, what is the incentive for the UFC to keep promoting him, for him to keep fighting in the UFC? If he leaves the UFC, if you're a promoter, do you take him off a loss? He'd be 1-6 in his last 7. Mm-hmm. Just a super hard spot for Chris Weidman. And he just he keeps getting hit and stopped. It's like, these aren't tight decisions he's losing.
Right.
It's a difficult thing. Anything else jump out on you in the card? What do we got here? I think the main card is kind of like there's not a lot to really hang your hat on here.
I like the Dariush Holtzman fight. I think that's going to be a good, exciting fight.
Yeah.
I always enjoy watching Tim Means fight.
Yeah. That's a good fight against Staropoulos.
Yeah. But and Kevin Holland's even fun to watch. But
and he's coming off that card. He was supposed to be on the card last weekend, right? So he's getting replaced and putting on a short notice against Joaquin Barkley. I think Gavin Tucker against Justin James is a fight to watch. I like that fight quite a lot. And Nasser Haqparast, Alexander Munoz. I think that's another one to sort of pay attention to as we're gearing up for the major UFC coming up on the 15th. Jeff, anything else on your mind here before we get out this weekend?
Not a whole lot. Just trying to keep up with these fights, trying to keep up with everything that's going on. Sometimes it's a little tough. Once they get the machine going, it's every weekend, and there's a lot of good fights on the different cards, and some of them have a really good main event, some of them are just interesting main events.
Yeah.
So, like last week, I pretty much only watched the main event. So that, I think I'll watch a little more this weekend, because there are a couple, there are some other fights. I do want to see how Chris Weidman, looks in there. And the couple fights that we talked about.
Yeah.
So those are interesting. So, and even, we'll see what Derek Lewis has, and, if he could fight off a couple submissions, and he still does hit very hard. So even when he's tired, he hits hard. That's one good thing that Derek Lewis has, is that usually, when these big heavyweights get tired, they lose a little power. It doesn't seem, Derek Lewis could seem like he's ready to pass out and just lay in the octagon and be done, but he still seems like he still carries that power, even though he's physically exhausted. So that always makes, a fight that he's in interesting until the last second, because you never know. So
when he starts fading, it's hard, because it just takes such a big mistake on the other side to lose.
Alexei gets hit a lot, though.
Yeah, he does. He does. So that's on Saturday. That's an ESPN Plus card. Bellator's on Friday. That's on DAZN and Paramount Network. Michael Chandler, Benson Henderson, and some other quality contests there. Jeff, as always, appreciate your time. We'd had some comments, and we do see your comments. Nothing that we're going to post. We had a question about Dan Hardy and Herb Dean and Dan Hardy. We talked about that last week. So if you want to catch up on that conversation, you can do that. We're all on YouTube. Subscribe, please, as always. And that's it. That's it.
Dana did comment about that. Did you see? And said that if you do talk to an official during a show like that, and it kind of made it sound like starting now.
Yeah, that's right.
That you'll be fired on the spot.
Yeah, he did say that. And then in the post-fight press conference, he totally crapped on a referee, I think. So, it's
do as I say, not as I do, Josh.
Yeah, no. That's the consistent messaging part, right? I mean, that's consistent. That's basically what it's been. I get him not wanting the staff on the floor to interact with the officials. Yeah, of course. I mean, it makes sense. But what's the real difference when you have the head of the show crapping on people? Really?
Right.
That's
and I don't think that was Dan's. I don't think that was a plan. I don't think
he reacted emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that he even sought out after her to have a conversation with him. I think it just kind of happened. Especially in the way that the fights are happening now. There's so few people there, and you can hear everything. Right. So the fighters can hear everything, the referees, the judges, everybody can hear everything, right? So I think it kind of just escalated because of that. I think if it's a normal crowd and a normal thing, none of that even happens.
None of that happens. Again, it's dealing with these, I'll call them unintended consequences of the situation. Yeah. You're not, as you're mapping it out, you're thinking about, okay, what's the best health and safety protocols we can do? We'll put these people here, and there, and limited number of people in the room. Certain people's voices get elevated. I mean, that's something that Herb Dean talked about on his response video, and that's a fair point. How do you deal with that? Remember when these fights first started taking place, the fighters were like, I could hear Daniel Cormier giving instructions, and I started doing what he's doing. That's wild, and it shouldn't be like that. And do you find an answer to it? Do you remove the commentators from the arena and do it remotely? I don't know what that answer is. But again, you have your way that you're trying to figure out through this crazy situation in the world. The UFC keeps delivering fights. Bellator and other people are doing it as well. But it's in these confined spaces. Mm-hmm. You're going to have these situations arise that nobody thought of. And, this was one of them. But again, I think if you're going to hold your employees to task for not say, you can't talk an official that way, and then you go out and you crap on the officials, which quite honestly, I don't have a problem with Dana doing necessarily. In that way, there is a separation between what the promoter's doing and what the governor and the state regulators are doing most of the time. Mm-hmm. Not always with the UFC, especially. They self-regulate. Bellator does as well. So, you sort of, we're all living through this moment. We're all learning as we go through it. It's just another one of these indications that none of this is normal. and we're all sort of just working our way through it. And
and Dana's the boss. He does what, I mean, he's the only one in the place not wearing a mask.
Yeah, stupid.
So I mean, you bring up having the commentators not in the arena. I don't know how much baseball you've been watching, but they're doing that from remote areas, and it's made it interesting.
Yeah.
And they could very easily do that in the UFC. Do I think that's a must? I don't really think so. It is what it is, and I think it kind of adds to the whole thing of having them there, and I kind of like it.
Okay.
So I'm kind of liking the no crowds. You can hear the punches, you could hear the kicks, you could hear the corner, you could hear everything. I like that. I've been enjoying that more.
I think we don't realize how much we're missing the crowd. Man, I watched. You know what I watched? I think it was one of the Ultimate Fighters with American Top Team and Brazilians, and I was watching a fight with Kamaru Usman. This is why I watched it. I think it was taking Haider Hassan, whatever it was. It was like so intense to watch these opposite teams in a confined space on top of one another, wanting it so bad. It just made, even though that fight in the moment, I started sweating. I was like, holy shit, because you're reacting to the energy of the crowd. And I don't think we realize how much we're missing that in any sports context, but especially combat sports. And I think when we get it back and we feel it and we see the fighters responding to a crowd and the crowd responding to the fighters, more importantly, you'll realize how big a component that was in what we're actually doing, and why we love this so much and why we keep coming back to it.
Well, I think that's true in all sports.
All sports. But
watching the Dodger game the other night, they're down a couple runs in the ninth, and it's silent.
Sure.
And they're at Dodger Stadium.
Yeah.
If there's sold out stadium, it's a completely different ball game.
All sports. I mean, the PGA Championships this weekend, no spectators on golf courses. It changes everything. You're not going to hear those loud roars, and the players aren't going to hear the loud roars as they're going through it. So it really is a different dynamic. But, we still tune in. People are adjusting. We appreciate everybody who's watching this, who's listening to us. Jeff, as always, of course. Check us out on YouTube. Subscribe. We always appreciate the feedback. We do see the comments. We appreciate them. We want to add more comments, so chime in. Some thoughts on what's going on with the fights, what's on your mind. We always want to hear that stuff as well. For Jeff Sherwood, I am Josh Gross. You have been listening to The Outsiders and watching The Outsiders because we're actually live on YouTube now. Take care, everybody.